St. Francis finished his rule in 1223, and he died just 3 years after completing the rule. And the rule was very short. It was only 12 chapters. And when I say a chapter, I mean paragraphs, maybe about 16 paragraphs altogether. Very short rule that was designed to govern over 7,000 friars when Francis died. And as time went on, there were little things that needed to be implemented, customs that the community began to do, ways to handle various disciplines of the life and situations. And these statutes that were written to help guide the life and the rule eventually made their way into a kind of a canon or a list of rules that became known as the Constitutions. The first official constitutions were written in 1260 by St. Bonaventure and at the Council of Narbonne, so they're called the Constitutions of Narbonne. And those led the order for quite some time. And over the centuries, those constitutions were added onto. And unfortunately, what happened was constitutional statements were put in that began to mitigate the rule, began to mitigate poverty, mitigate the prayer life, mitigate penances, and so forth. And so as time went on, those mitigations built up and the life became mitigated. Reform movements happened. Most notably was the reform movement in the 15th century by St. Bernardine of Siena and John Capistrano and James the March. And they wrote a set of constitutions that kind of pulled away a lot of that stuff that was mitigating the rules so they could return to the authentic expression of the life. But, you know, human nature being what it is, and water following the path of least resistance, so does human nature, the friars quickly fell away from what was that pure observance of the life as given in the constitutions by the observant reform. So in 1528, not long after the conventuals and the observants split into two different groups, the Capuchin reform began as a splinter off of the observant friars. It was 1528. And what they began with when they gathered in the little chapel at Albacina, they wrote a series of statutes that would be a kind of an addendum to the constitutions of Narbonne. So one would follow the rule of St. Francis and the old constitutions, except where the statutes of Albacina diverted. And the statutes of Albacina were really good, and they were meant to correct the abuses and the mitigations. And as time went on, 7 years later, 1235, the Capuchins had a chapter in Rome at San Euphemia's, and a servant of God, Bernardine of Asti, wrote a new set of constitutions for the Capuchins. And it was really a divergence from the original constitutions because they explained not only the life and how to live it, but why to live it. And I know specialists in who have studied constitutions of religious life over the centuries who have said they are the most beautiful constitutions ever written. And they're beautiful because they explain why the friars do what they do. And now there's different ways to write constitutions. Constitutions can be written to mitigate the rule, kind of like saying, well, here's the rule, but here's what we're going to actually live. Or one can write a set of constitutions to protect the rule. And that's the gift that the Capuchins offered to the church and to the Franciscan order, is that their constitutions were meant to be, as they called it, the Tower of David, the unconquerable tower, a wall, a fence to protect the rule that was planted by St. Francis. And that's the design of the entire constitutions. You will not find in the constitutions of the early Capuchins anywhere where it diverts from the rule of St. Francis. So when I was beginning the community, I returned immediately to the Capuchin Constitutions of 1536, and I did what they did. I updated the constitutions only when necessary and kept it strict to the life as Francis had given it to us. So whenever there appears to be some sort of contradiction between the rule and the constitutions, the rule takes precedence because the constitutions are at the service of the rule, not the rule at the service of the constitutions. In other words, we live the rule of St. Francis according to the constitutions, and that's what we vow to do, to truly observe the rule. And so our constitutions are beautiful because they protect it. And our Marian vow is like Our Lady's veil, protecting the life.